for leaving fish oil behind. For one, we have a real problem with marine pollution. You all know about heavy metals. Maybe you've heard about polychlorinated bisphenols, and these are organic compounds that were released into the marine ecosystem when electrical transformers are thrown away. We have OPCs, which are also a major problem. They're everywhere in the marine ecosystem now. Of course, we take precautions. As you know, we're extremely careful with the fish oils that we use. We clean them rigorously. That's not a problem for us. But there is another problem with fish oil, which even at Zinzino, we cannot find a solution to. And that is, there just aren't enough fish in the sea. If you do some very basic mathematics and you work out, well, how many people are there who need omega-3s? What volume of omega-3s does that mean? How much is the biomass of oily fish in the sea? It's clear we cannot rely on the marine ecosystem alone. We have to start to find other sources of omega-3s. So let's move on from the idea of fishing. Now, for many of you, you've done a little bit of fishing. It's a nice thing to do. I mean, I find it boring as hell, but but it's a personal activity that people find enjoyable. But the whole point is this: fishing today is occurring at an industrial, at a factory level, and it's unsustainable. It's unsustainable. If you look at the volumes of fish that we're hauling out of the sea, and we're bringing that back to the factories, and we're processing it, we're testing it, we're screening it, we're cleaning it as much as we can. We're doing the best that we can. We actually, with Lisi, have an extraordinarily high grade of fish oil. It really is an impeccable source. I will only work with what are the highest standards there are available, and that Zinzino shares my philosophy. What we have in Balance Oil is a first-rate product. I'm not against any of that. So we blend that with the pre-harvest olive oil. You know all about that. We add the polyphenols, a few other things as well. And these have been our flagship products. There have been some technical innovations. We stuttered a little bit when we introduced Balance Oil X. Those initial problems we've resolved. We now have a product that is fantastically good at making micro suspensions in water-based drinks, which could be anything from milk to orange juice or wherever else it is that you want to drink. And this is also really important and really helpful for people who have problems with their liver or with their bile duct and who can't emulsify oils. For them, this is an ideal solution. But we have to go elsewhere. We have to find additional sources of omega-3s. And what we have to do is to move from the marine ecosystem, we have to start to think about terrestrial omega-3s. Now, many of you, I think all of you, have seen this slide before. It's not the fish that make the omega-3s, it's the marine seaweed. So theoretically, and in practical terms, it turns out we can cut out the fish, we can go directly to the source. We can go to those seaweeds. We can harvest them. And in many ways, this gives us a lot of advantages. For a start, it's an alternative to fish, but growing marine algae, whether you do it either in the wild or in farming situations, actually in the seas, in the estuaries, or whether you take it into bioreactors, these have a far higher growth rate. You can produce biomass very, very quickly, far more quickly than you can waiting for fish to grow up. And it's also quicker than growing land crops. Now, you know that Monsanto produces an omega-3, which they grow in a genetically modified strain of soy. There are pros and cons. I don't think it's a very good product, and nonetheless it is commercial. But even growing soy, although it's an efficient way of making oils, we beat that hands down. If you work with microalgae, it's a whole lot quicker than that, and it's very much more effective. It's not just the omega-3s that these plants make. They make a whole range of very bioactive, very specific micronutrients, phytonutrients that we can't find anywhere else, which have a whole range of properties. So some of these compounds have anti-cancer properties, some of them have antihypertensive properties, some of them have antibacterial properties, and they're being developed by different groups of scientists. you're not competing for land space. If you're using either biomass reactors or you're marine harvesting, you're not taking other plants' food crops out of cultivation. This is a way of fixing carbon dioxide. If you're worried about increasing carbon dioxide levels and the impact that might have on climate shift, then this is a potential part solution to that as well. And finally, when you're growing biomass, if it's in a marine environment, when you're doing it, you can actually fix heavy metal pollutants and take them out of the environment. So this is a strategy that has many, many pluses. Now, it kind of started like this, with hand harvesting of some of the strains of marine algae, and it rapidly developed to a more industrialized sort of mass harvesting technology. But where we're at now is in bioreactors, and I've been visiting and working with bioreactors for over 10 years now. There's one in Stockholm, actually, where they produced astaxanthin, and there are bioreactors all over the world, a lot in Israel, in South Africa, in South America. This is one typical example. What you're seeing here is seawater is being pumped through this system, and the algae, as they move with the water, they gradually mature, and by the time they come to the end of the reactor, they're ready for harvesting. And you can do this in all kinds of formats. There are many different shapes and types of column that we use. The one thing that they have in common that we're interested in is this microalgae, which is called Terrestrial. And this is interesting to us because it's very widely dispersed in the oceans. It's very tolerant to a wide range of different conditions. It has EFSA approval. Now EFSA, some of you know my views on EFSA. It's a totally dysfunctional regulatory system, but they have accepted this as a novel food product, so for once they've got the facts right. And the interesting thing about this microalga is it's a very, very rich source of the compounds that we want. It's more than half of its weight is triglycerides, and amongst that triglyceride fraction, a very substantial amount are omega-3s. This is where the food chain starts. This is where the fish get their fish oil from. This is where we have traditionally got the omega-3s from. So, same as before, we're adding the pre-harvest olive oil, same as before, and that gives us this new flagship product. But there's more in balance oil. We have to have a little vitamin D, we have to have a few other things, and so this has been traditionally a real stumbling block for people who are vegan and who are very dogmatic, or should I say ideologically pure, about being vegans. So what we've done, this is the composition of the vegan balance oil. It's 45% is algal oil from the microalgae I showed you previously. 35% is from the pre-harvest virgin olive oil. We've got echium oil at 20%, and I'll show you what echium is in a moment because maybe some of you are not so familiar with it. The mixed tocopherols are in there because this is really an industry standard, and they have a role to play in maintaining the integrity of the omega-3s in the manufacturing and storage stage. And then vegan vitamin D. Now, vegan vitamin D is actually very new. It hasn't been around for very long. Just to let you know, it is D3, cholecalciferol. There are some theoretical advantages for going for D3 rather than D2. And that's the echium. You recognize this? Echium vulgare, its other name is purple viper bugloss. And again, this is a plant I've been interested in since 1997 because it's been around, this science has been around for a long, long time now. But because the regulators were so ridiculous, they said, oh, this is not a food source. And SDA, which is one of the oils that it contains, we don't know if it's safe. Of course, the regulators ignored the fact that you make SDA in your own bodies. Still, they felt it was strange and potentially toxic, so we had to be protected from that, and they dug their heels in and delayed it. But eventually, a couple of companies, including Croda and one or two other companies that I have connections with, got to the point where they obtained regulatory approval and started growing Echium vulgare on a commercial scale. It's the seeds from this plant that contain the oil, and this is the source of vegan vitamin D3. It's lichen. Some people call it lichen, whatever you want, however you pronounce it. And vitamin D, there are many other compounds which you find in many, many different organisms. You find them across nature. The beta-glucans I've talked about before. Every life form, every higher life form has receptors in their immune systems for beta-glucans. Well, vitamin D is also something that you find very widely distributed in the animal and the plant kingdoms. And the lichens make vitamin D3 for their own purposes, not for us, obviously, but they make it in significant amounts, and it's this vitamin D3 that we harvest, concentrate, purify, and add to our vegan balance oil to maintain the vegan integrity of this particular product. So it's breaking it down even further. The algal oil within 5 ml dose, that is 2,150 milligrams, containing 1,604 milligrams of omega-3s. EPA and DHA, they have the figures. There's the oleic acid from the olive oil. And then break the echium oil down even further. What's in it? Well, it contains almost 30% in the best fractions by weight of 2 very interesting fatty acids. Now, in the past, we've mostly talked about EPA and DHA as being critically important, but lipidomics is more complicated than that. There are many other fatty acids which are interesting to us, which have different physiological roles in the body and which provide additional benefits. So balance oil, when we first came up with that, it was, I think, the best and most effective form that it could possibly be. It was way ahead of the competition, but we will continue to grow, we will continue to develop it as the science continues to develop it. So you're going to be hearing more about SDA, which is stearidonic acid. Stearidonic acid is an intermediate. When you eat basically vegetarian, short-chain omega-3s, when you transform it in the body, which we don't do very effectively, to EPA and DHA, SDA is on that road. It's an intermediate. But SDA on its own, it has its own very interesting and unique properties. It has anti-inflammatory results of its own by suppressing the release and the metabolism of arachidonic acid. And this is over and above the effects of EPA and DHA. So this gives you an additional anti-inflammatory efficacy. And then the other compound that's very interesting to us in echium oil is GLA, which is gamma-linolenic acid. This is the same omega-6 that you find in blackcurrant seed oil or in borage oil. This is an omega-6. But don't get all nervous or upset with me. Not all omega-6s are bad. We've kind of said in the past, omega-3 good, omega-6 bad. We lied. Yeah, I mean, it's partly true. It's mostly true. But some omega-6s are quite good for you too. Some omega-3s are not that anti-inflammatory. And this particular omega-6 has an anti-inflammatory effect all of its own. This is a really good omega-6. And again, by adding this to the blend of the different fatty acids in vegan balance oil, we believe that this will make the product, if anything, even more effective. So for those of you who remember the Smiths album of its name, Meat is Murder, for those of you who want to take an ethically very lofty position, I'll agree with that. I'll just concede. I am not a vegan, I'm not a vegetarian. I would find it very difficult to give up bacon and T-bone steaks. But for those of you who do, those of you who have given up on everything like that, this is a way to achieve balance and maintain the moral high ground. Simple story. Thank you.